I'm Kayte Lewis from Voice Lawyers, and this is Voice in the Crowd, the podcast for people, not lawyers. It's about demystifying the law, speaking in plain English, and sharing practical insights into how the legal system really works in everyday life. Each episode draws on real stories and experiences, the good, the bad, and the confusing. If you feel overwhelmed or confused by the law, or you're just interested in our stories, this podcast is for you. Voice in the Crowd, where the law meets real people.
My name's Jamelle, and welcome to the Voice Lawyers Family Law Panel on rebuilding after divorce or separation. Kayte has introduced everyone, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight and pay respects to elders past and present. Kayte mentioned a statistic about divorce, and the latest ABS figures are from 2024. How many marriages do you think there were in 2024? There were 120,844, and the number of divorces granted were almost 50,000, 48,000. So interesting, sobering statistic. People are obviously still wanting to get married, but a lot of those marriages aren't working. A little bit of trivia, the most popular date to marry that year was the 24th of February, and it wasn't even Valentine's Day, so I have no idea. Anyway, divorce and separation, if you look at any of the stress charts that psychologists use, they're up alongside bereavement as being high on the psychologically disruptive life event. They're, very, very stressful, affecting your mental health, your finances, your identity, your family, social dynamics. There is no magic way to have a good divorce. If we knew how to do that, we'd do it, but we don't learn it. We can't learn it at school. We can't learn it at university. It's trial by error, I guess. And I'm sure that some are more smooth than others. I don't know. Our experts here are dealing with this sort of thing every day in terms of counselling, in terms of the law, in terms of finance. So we're going to talk to them for a little while, and then you will have about half an hour at the end to ask questions. So feel free to ask anything. You don't have to identify yourself because it is recorded. You can just put your hand up and ask a question. We respect your right to remain anonymous. So I'm going to throw the first question at Kayte. I've known Kayte a long time. I've actually interviewed her for some stories I've done about people having a day in court and the cost of that. And I'm not just talking about the financial cost, but the emotional cost as well. And Kayte has told me some ripping stories about this sorts of arguments.
Well, there's probably a few big mistakes that people make. I guess they could all be covered by getting far too emotional about it, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to say, in that it is an extremely emotional time. And of course, it's like this ripping apart. So it's, you can't say, look, just don't be emotional, it'll all be okay. But in having said that, I think one of if I sort of break that mistake down, I think it's not taking the time to prepare and to sort of project past the divorce and think, well, what do I want? And I think people that actually take the time to think about that carries them through that really difficult time. So I think it's that sort of failing to sit and sort of forecast and take that time to think, well, I'm moving away from this, but what do I want now? They often tend to focus on what they don't want. And when they focus on that, it just seems to be a lot more painful and difficult.
I'll throw this one at Karen. How does domestic violence complicate this process?
I think domestic violence, when it comes to looking and supporting the children, that's what we try and do. And what we find is that a lot of the time, kids are caught in the middle and they don't know which side to go with. And what I always find is kids will love both parents, regardless of the domestic violence. The one thing that I've always found in over a long time, the one thing kids always want is their parents to get back together again. And so what parents have to navigate is to be able to work together. And that's really hard. And I guess that's a whole nother topic of working with a very difficult ex-partner. And I think that's a different topic. But with domestic violence, the main thing is keep your kids safe, keep them close, keep the conversation going, and make sure that you're there. And make sure that when the kids want to talk, you're available. Because one of the things we find when parents are in their own quagmire of emotion, parents want to talk to their kids on their time, their terms. But actually you have to be there and be open for when your kids want to talk, because it's going to be at the most inconvenient.
And Kate, on that subject of domestic violence, how does that complicate things for you as a lawyer?
A lot of our cases involve domestic violence. That seems to just be what happens for us, and that's the people that often come to us. It complicates things because you know that it's going to take longer. You just know that it's going to take longer. You know that every little aspect is probably going to be fought in the case, and that there's sort of very difficult to find any area of agreement because there's so much hurt and there's so much pain, um, and so much sense of injustice that it's hard to kind of move past that. And so that just makes everything take a lot longer. And also, usually you think about the other party. If we're representing the side that is the victim, then the other side often will maybe make things take longer as well and be less amenable to things that are just basic, that you just go, why wouldn't someone agree to that? And it often then the focus doesn't so much, it's not on the kids and it's not on something that's logical. It's often very illogical.
Like what, for example?
Yeah, I can give you lots of examples. So, for example, we want to pick up at this midpoint because it's closer to everybody and it's really practical. I mean, the pickup point is a huge, I can't tell you how many letters we write about where the changeover point is going to be. And there'll be, the other person will just not agree. They'll want to meet somewhere else that's, maybe 500, half a kilometre away. And it makes no sense as to why we've had to write 3 letters about that and get an order and an interim hearing about it. So, so silly things like that. But it's nice to say, well, you just need to get along. But the reality when we're trying to sort those things out is that it just doesn't. And so you do see when there's domestic violence that the fees will go up and the time involved goes up.
Okay. And you were suggesting that people who are otherwise might be reasonable when it comes to divorce and separation because there are all those emotions involved, they become unreasonable, or they would seem that way to the other party. Um, does a similar thing happen with money? Do people who have come together, been together a long time, shared finances, perhaps even a shared business, when they're separating or divorcing, do they suddenly become unreasonable? And how does that play out?
Like you said, through the divorce and separation, it brings out the worst in people. Right. Even a even a logical person becomes illogical because of all the emotions involved. Whether it's domestic violence, or you just feel that the other person owes you something. So I think that emotional side takes over and you wholly really. And in terms of money, like, I've earned the money, like you stayed at home with the kids, so you don't deserve that much. You hear all of that. And yeah, you've not contributed super, so why should you be getting super as part of the settlement? So there are all these things that, bring out the ugliest part of anyone in a divorce and separation. So for money, like, money is a rare commodity, right? Everyone works hard for it. So money is a big thing everyone wants to fight about. And you definitely see clients who want to hide assets
and they'll start hiding it probably early on, and you don't even know that you don't that that I mean the share portfolio or whatever have existed. And and unfortunately for women, like a lot of women don't really want to handle the finance, so they just feel that they're not equipped to do it. And they are at a disadvantage because if the husband, I'm not trying to generalize, we've got a few men in the room. But sometimes when the husband is the one looking after the finances, they don't really the women like, oh, okay, I've got enough money for the kids, for groceries, and that's all they're bothered about, right? They won't really watch like, oh, the balance has decreased by this much, or so it is hard for the women if they don't really know their finances well or what's happening in the family. They will be disadvantaged, unfortunately.
And is the reverse also true? Do you have examples of women doing this, Janine, hiding assets away?
Personally, no. Think as a woman, and I've a lot of women that I've talked to in this situation, their main concern is about the kids, about the family, not so much of, okay, I need to stash some money away for myself. But I did speak to a prospect, a potential client today. It's interesting because of different family values. They're both Asians, but different family values. So she started buying property without telling the partner. And they've been together for 8 years. And she told me, like, our conversation is actually private, right? And she was like, oh, I actually bought a second property now. Like, what? So, I got referred to her by her partner because he feels that she's very stressed and working so many extra shifts because she can't afford the mortgage repayments. But she's wanting to build wealth and not telling him. So I'm like, I'll leave it to you to actually inform him because it's not my business to actually tell him. Although, I knew him first, right? So I would say it's not common, but it can happen, and really depends on why you're doing, why you're doing a certain action, or why you've made the decision. So, but I did tell them, like, probably for you guys, it's like, seeking proper counseling to understand where you want to go together in this relationship. I think that's more important because they seem to have different goals. But yet they've been together for a while. So it's interesting. Like, you really do meet a lot of different people.
I mean, back in the day, before you got married, you used to I don't know, go and talk to your local priest and get some counselling, or actually talk about common goals and things. That I don't know that happens very much now, but is there any value to that? Perhaps having a counselling before you get married, or talking to someone about your common goals.
I think there's, I'm a psychologist. Yes, of course, there's a lot of yes, there's a lot of value in doing that. And I think one of the things is it's very easy to get married now, and it's very easy also to get divorced when there's not all that extra stuff going on. But I think the one thing is, if you don't have these shared goals, where's the future? And people don't look long term now. They look short term. Everything is instantaneous. Everything is disposable. And yeah, we can do this and then we'll just move on. But one of the things that we find is what I encourage a lot of people to do when you go into a marriage, get that pre-counselling. Let's see if you're actually suitable past the lust phase. And then also look at, you're going to go through rough times. Is there something that you can work on? Let's build that resilience, not only for yourselves, but into the marriage. And especially if there are kids involved, how do you work through tough times? Because we're all going to go through tough times. The kids are going to go through tough times in school. They're not going to get on with the kid they're sitting next to. They talk too much. Their arm is niggling me, mum. But they need to come around to thinking of those things. And if we teach our kids early on how to manage disputes or niggles and how to build that resilience and say, you know what, we can actually move forward and we can work together to solve an issue. And I think one of the things that we find is couples don't want to work through things because we don't have to wait for things. I think back in the days, when you had to wait to earn enough money to buy the couch or buy the fridge that you wanted, we don't have that anymore. And I think it's really important now for us and for the generations to come to build that knowledge that marriage is a sacred thing rather than just it's a disposable entity that you can get rid of and we'll move on to the next partner.
Mm. And I guess, Kate, we're also talking about de facto relationships too, or unless you want to add.
And just, well, it kind of goes into that same. I'm following on from that, whether it's de facto, whether you are actually getting married. One of the things that we find is the difficulty. People might want to have a binding financial agreement, which, is a prenup. Most people refer to it as a prenup. And the amount of times that someone will come along, want a prenup done and go, yep, sure, no problem, we can do that. And we start the work, and then we get to the point of having to share the financial disclosure or obtain the financial disclosure from the other side. And, oh, we don't hear from them for a bit, and then we're like, well, what's happening? We need to progress this matter. And I think it comes back to that issue. I think then people hit that point where they're going, they don't want to have that conversation. And they go, oh, look, it's all fine. It's all fine. It's all happy. Well, I don't want to upset things by, having that conversation. And sometimes we will have done almost all of the work for that to happen. And then it just all stops. And so I think, in my opinion, experience, and from what I've seen, that's obviously a red flag. Like, if you can't have that conversation about finances and about disclosure at that point, I don't know. I'm not the psychologist, but I kind of go, oh, are you sure this is working for you? But, I just leave it at that.
But there are so many things that filter into that. There's, especially for the younger ones these days, there's the pressure of their families saying, well, we've got, we've bought the dress, we've done this, we've got the venue, we need to go ahead with this. But even in de facto relationships, it's still as important. You don't have to have that certificate to say that you're together. I think it's really important for everybody to be honest. And I think that's where relationships go astray, because they're not honest. But first and foremost, you have to be honest with yourself. Is this the relationship that you actually want? Or are you in it because it's easy? You know where you're going, you know the other person.
Okay, it's easy until it's not.
That's right.
Is there any, do all of you come across any particular age at which people start getting divorces, or, has that changed over time? Or something I'm aware of is that a big problem for the government at state and federal level at the moment is older women over 50 being homeless because they, as you mentioned, they've perhaps been in a marriage and it hasn't worked out and they've not managed their finances. They've left it all to their partner. Do you see older couples getting divorced now?
Yes.
More?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about
I can. Just to finish that, I think a de facto is a harder situation to bring up those issues at whatever age, because there's no sort of line in the sand as to when you should have that conversation. So I think that's actually even more difficult. But yes, I would say that we're seeing people, that are older going through divorces, or even looking to negotiate binding financial agreements because they're going into a new relationship in their 60s or even 70s. And financially, it's really, really difficult because, well, I guess I talk about women. I mean, not that we only assist women, but when you see like women that haven't had the background and then they're confronted with having to provide financial disclosure, and then, I mean, we've had people that have never in their 20 or 30-year marriage never paid a bill and don't actually know how to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's obviously really traumatic and really difficult. But I think Louise mentioned it before. So many, even women that have been perhaps even in finance themselves, and I've definitely seen this. And then they kind of let it go for being married maybe 15 years or so, and it's like, oh, well, they've just sort of fallen out of the way because it's been looked after and they've been focusing on kids. And then all of a sudden they're faced with a divorce situation. And then it's like they don't know where things are. They don't know how much they've got or that they owe or any of those things. And particularly, yeah, with women looking at 50 and over 50, which of course I am, um, then, they're looking at this at super and often sort of, oh, no, we don't, it's too hard. He'll get upset if I look at the super, but they're not looking at how imminent that the situation could be, that they're not going to be able to house themselves and those sorts of things. And often, I would be saying, I think you should go and talk to somebody that's a counselor or a financial advisor, which is, how we've come by this panel discussion tonight.
Mm. And what do you tell people, Louise, about how to get themselves back on track? That they're going through a divorce, they're going to lose assets, half their business maybe. What do you advise them to do when they come? What are some of the first things you tell them? Or if they come to you and say, I've filed for divorce, it's with lawyers, it's underway, I've got all these assets, this money. What do you say to them first up? What do they need to do?
So like what Katie mentioned, I think Karen mentioned earlier about, your goals, what you want going forward. Yes, you are in a very bad predicament. At the moment, you're going through this, but I think it's important to look forward what you actually want. Because without that in mind, it's very hard for your lawyer to actually work out what sort of settlement you probably need. So it's important to actually be forward looking. Yes, it is tough, really, really tough. But that looking forward aspect is important. You might need to change your lifestyle a bit. You might need to adapt to, maybe not living in the most posh suburb or having a 4-bedroom house, downsizing because you have to, because the bank will lend you as much money. So it's taking all these things into consideration and being practical, right? You know, if your kids do not need to be in private school, because I think private school is not really part of that calculation, right? You know, maybe time to change your school or, just have to work out on how you're going to live one. And if the wife especially, hasn't worked for many years and it's only a part-time job, there are changes to be made. So I think that forward-looking aspect is very important. But I do tell women, like in my conversations when I help them with loan applications, when they're buying property, like for them to really know, their income, their expenses, their assets and liabilities. Because full disclosure, to the banks. I mean, even if you don't want to, the banks have got access to your credit report. They know how much you've borrowed, what you're trying to do. And it's surprising, like some people totally don't know what the credit score is. I've worked with clients who've got a negative credit score. I'm like, what have you done? So, it's helping people to get back on track and, for them to really understand their finances even before anything happens. I think it's important for women to understand money before anything happens. And it's for your own good, for your kids' well-being and for the whole family.
Kate, in your observations, who are the people who fare best in a divorce or separation? What sort of people?
What sort of people? Oh, I don't know if I should answer that one on record. Look, I mean, I kind of already said it before. It's the people that go into it and can deal with the emotion, which is why I think it's always good to have some psychological support. And if you need that, which most people do when you're going through it, then that's really helpful. Because if you can focus on the logic and try and stay practical, then I think they're the people that come out of it in best way, because they've actually, from that point, you can easily put together a plan. You can see what you've got. Um, and I understand, when you're dealing with people, they're in turmoil, but, from a lawyer's point of view, and we always have this sheet that we give out to all of our new clients called Managing Your Legal Costs, which which gives people advice on how to best engage with their lawyer so that their fees remain manageable. And that'll be like, don't email 6 times a day. Don't email one-word answers. Don't kind of send your big emotional rant to your lawyer. Like try and keep it to every maybe 3 days or once a week. Like if you can compile your thoughts, and then maybe just park them for a minute and then think, well, is this really what I want to spend my money on? Because if you send us a one word or, a short phrase email with, there is such and such and I can't believe it, we still have to read it. We still have to file it, and we still have to treat that as if it was an email that had, all of these fabulous instructions in it.
And you're charging for your
Yes. And so I think that's something that the people that can do that, they will come out of it better. 1, their fees will be lower, and 2, they'll also make better decisions because they'll have that ability to kind of step back and go, okay, yes, I'm upset, but what do we need out of this? And I think if they can get the support around them with people that can help them to do that, then that's going to be better.
And are there documents and things they can gather themselves so they're not paying your team to do it?
Yes, there's always documents that they can gather themselves. And that is, ideal. I think one of the issues, and I know we're really focusing this largely on women, and that's not all the only people that we represent. But often they'll be in such a state of overwhelm that just seems beyond them. But if they can get some help, and I know that's one of the things that Louise actually helps people with, is to sit beside them at a lower rate than what I would charge to sit beside them and do that. Then and actually compile it and put it all together and have it make sense. Then obviously that's something that they can do, and it's better if they do.
And what point should people getting a divorce engage a lawyer? Leading question for you. But, I mean, do some people enter this and say, okay, we don't need a lawyer.
Yeah.
We'll try and do this ourselves. And at one point it just breaks and then.
Yeah, lots of people do that. Now I'm going to say something. I mean, we've got a mixture of men and women in the room here. My observation over the years of doing this, which is, I was trying to tell somebody before, 2012, what are we now? 14 years. Okay, 14 years of doing this is I will have men come to me 12 months to 2 years before they're thinking of separating. And they will get advice and they will understand the process, and they will get a list from me of all of the things that they need to get together, and they'll go away. And clearly that's what they then start to do. We offer an early strategy session to women to really try and address that. And there's often a lot of resistance. Often women will come when it's already in crisis, when there's been a domestic violence incident, there's been some other, form of an affair, or they've been told that, they're separating, or they've decided to separate, whatever the reason is. And it's often done in crisis. And I think that puts them at a distinct disadvantage. And probably if the signs would have been there and they perhaps could have read them earlier.
What if you can't afford a lawyer?
That is difficult because it is a complex process. There are other resources that you can use. But I think then you need to start to become very resourceful and even more focused and, really have to click into that logic side of your brain and move away from the emotion if you're going to do it yourself. I think that's what you're going to have to do, because that becomes a much more difficult thing, because you don't have the lawyer to moderate that. And it is not a user-friendly system to navigate at all. And that's not designed by us. That's just what it is. So, yeah.
And at what point do you actually advise a client accept this settlement and walk there's this thing that everyone wants their day in court, everyone wants to be right, everyone has a bit of, I want to win this in them, but sometimes the costs can just keep going and going, and you can see that they can't move forward. At one point, do you actually say to someone, I think you should accept this and go?
Yeah. Most family law matters will settle without going all the way through to court. I think the statistics used to be something like 95% or something. It's very high. What happens is you'll often find that will have been an offer that was made by one party or the other much earlier in the piece, but the emotions were running way too high for it to be accepted at that point. And then after spending somewhat more fees, and they may well have been advised to have accepted it at that point, but they didn't. And then it'll, be accepted later on. So pretty much there's a range in family law that is kind of within the range that falls within the Family Law Act, and what you get a bit of a feel for it after a while, as to this is what somebody's likely to get if it goes to court. So if it's in that range, and it's something that they can live with, then we would advise them to accept it.
And moving on to the rebuilding process, we've talked a little bit about how divorce is psychologically hard for all sorts of reasons. How long would it take someone, I'll ask you this, Karen, to actually realistically to get over a divorce? Like, what are the sorts of things that people tell you?
Look, I think there's no easy answer to that one, because some people can actually say, I'm over it already, because they've been out of the marriage or out of. So as soon as it's been finalised and you're a few months down the track, people will say, I'm fine. But realistically, it could be years until they get there, until both men and women get themselves together, and especially when their kids involved. Because one of the things is emotions don't run to our schedule or anybody else's schedule. It's up to the individual. And I think when you've got kids involved in that, the one thing that I realised after all these years is kids are so resilient. And kids will often say to me, you know what, Karen, I knew Mum and Dad were going to get a divorce. It was just a matter of time.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of like, oh, well, you realise well before your parents realise. And it's really quite interesting to see how insightful the kids are. And we also have to think that the kids are really resilient and they will bounce back. And they will get used to the new norm. But I think what I'm saying is, and I go back to my initial statement of kids really do want their parents to get back together regardless, but they will get used to the new norm. But that may take years. And you know what? It's up to parents to make that happen. And whether you do co-parenting or whether you do parallel parenting, depending on how the situation is, that's what's going to help. But if you can keep the kids at the centre of it all, you will actually find that the process at some point, and this is from a psych point of view, not a lawyer's point of view, will become easier for all sides.
This one's for you, Kate. What are some of the biggest family law myths that you've heard in your career?
Gosh. Myths. That I'm going to take back what I put in. That's a big myth that we often have to deal with.
As in,
well, I put this much money in and so I should get that much back out. Or that if I've got the kids 50-50, I'm going to get 50-50 of the property settlement. That is, that's quite a frustrating one. That the kids have to go 50-50 with each parent. That's also quite a myth.
So
At what age can the kids decide that? Or how's that
why are
negotiated?
you giving me all of Just like- there is no age. There is no age where suddenly children can decide. In fact, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a case where I think the family court ordered a 17-year-old to return from the United States and live with the parent that was in Australia. So they were almost at 18, and that was, so there really is no age. But what happens is there's a whole process of, of social workers or psychologists that will do family reports, and rightly or wrongly, people have lots of different opinions on this. That often carries quite a lot of weight if the matter does go through to court, and 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 they will often make some kind of recommendation within that, having spoken to the children and talked to both parents. But in that case that I mentioned, I believe the family report was the thing that recommended that the child should come back. That the 17-year-old was like, no, I'm staying in the United States, but the judge actually ordered them back. But it's an interesting decision. Although I have heard more and more recently where judges will say, well, the child's 13 or 14 and this matter's going to take 2 years and they're going to vote with their feet. I can order whatever you like, but the child's going to go where they want to go. Say that quite a lot lately, notwithstanding that they can make whatever order they want to make.
Do the courts make it hard? Why? I mean, is when it comes to family law, is the justice system just so out of touch that?
I actually don't think the justice system is out of touch. I think it's an extremely difficult process to go through. And you've got to remember that there's so much process and so many documents and so much disclosure that has to be provided. But if you think you're a complete stranger who is going to make lifelong decisions for this family, I mean, I would want to know a lot of stuff too. You can't just make those decisions on a whim. They're huge decisions for a judge to make. And I think every single judge that you go before or senior judicial registrar would say, this is your family. You need to be the ones taking responsibility and making those decisions. But if you really can't, then that's when the judge steps in. So I think a lot of the system is designed to give lots of places where the parties are encouraged to kind of have a look at that and to make those decisions themselves. And I think sometimes that's why it's such a long and drawn out process. And I actually, might be controversial, I actually don't think that is a bad thing a lot of the time, because sometimes there's stuff that just needs to be in place for a little while, and you wouldn't want to be having somebody make those decisions or even making those decisions straight after separation. So it's not necessarily a really bad thing. Obviously, it is stressful and it goes on, and there are bad things about it. But I think if you look at it objectively and from the point of view of being a judge, which I think would be incredibly difficult, what would you want to make those sorts of decisions for a complete stranger and some children that you've never met? It'd be pretty nerve-wracking.
Louise, question for you. What's the best outcome after a divorce financially for both parties? Of course, everyone wants everything, but if, what do you feel is the very best outcome?
The best outcome is, both parties, not so happy with the settlement, but, the settlement they can actually live with. Yeah, everyone's unhappy. But, you need to move on with your decisions. I think that's the important bit. And if, for example, one party wants to buy out the other party's share of the property, so it's important. I mean, the best outcome is really like that one party is able to get the loan to service it, and the banks will lend them money to buy over that share. It's only when, they're unable to do that, then, obviously they're going to make different decisions, whether they need to sell the property as well. And then with whatever they get out of settlement, to actually borrow just based on their single income, and get the loan approved for that property. So there's a lot of things to work out, right? From that new way living forward. Uh, Job, that's great. If that never really worked and only helped in the other person's business, it will be really, really hard. So, I guess understanding, that's why I said, understanding your finances early. You don't need to wait for something to happen before you understand your finances. So anyone, whether men or women, from time you actually start working, and, understanding what you earn, what you spend, what assets you're building up for yourself, what liabilities that you're actually owing. These are just important and very basic fundamentals. And I personally believe financial literacy is a new abundance. You understanding your finances is really the best way forward.
Okay. Last question, because I'm aware that we are going over time and the audience may have some questions. For you, Karen, what does a good family law to after a divorce? What does a good situation? What's the best you can hope for in terms of for the parties involved, for the children involved?
Look, I think if you can have two autonomous households that can work either independently or cooperatively. But if you can't work cooperatively, to just focus on your own home, because you can only control what is in your own home, control what's in the other home, but making sure that you've got as far as you can and everything that you need, everything that your kids need. So making sure that you have enough uniforms, you have the pencils, you have, what their lunch boxes, and making sure that they feel okay and they feel heard, because being heard is so powerful for the kids. Also making sure that their routines are the same in both households. Normality for the kids is what they seek. And you will find that the kids a lot of the time will want to be closer to you. So all those little things, by them sidling up to you, by them wanting an extra long kiss goodnight, for them just wanting more of your time. Don't ignore that, because that's what's going to help them grow and get used to their new norm. And just focus on your new norm. And by them seeing your resilience and the way you create your new identity as a single person, or whether you're becoming a new family, a new nuclear family, it's really important for them to see that you can grow from what has gone not the way that you thought it would.
Thank you. Does any our audience have any questions for any of our panel experts who could talk all night probably about the experiences they've had and the things they've seen over the years in their jobs? Now's the time. Yes.
I have a question. So let's say your divorce is finalized. I will go through myself, but that they still have a certain amount of time to ask for certain things. So even if the divorce finalized, they can still ask for like your financials and all these other things. Is that correct? And is there a timeline?
So the question is, once your divorce is finalized, so you've got the document through, is there a time frame after that where both parties can still ask each other for things
Like financial
financial,
or even like
or assets, or property, or furniture, or
Yes,
or a
is
fridge?
the short a fridge. Yes. So that yes is the short answer. There's in the legislation says there's 12 months from the date that your divorce is finalised for you to make a property settlement. However, there's a whole bunch of cases where the court has exercised its discretion for various reasons, and
I'd be here all night to go through those. But there's a great article on our website about this with those cases listed. Where up to 10 years the court is reopening cases because someone's brought a hardship application or whatnot. So it's important to not just get your divorce. It's really important to finalize your property settlement. And there are only two ways of doing that. One is through orders with the court, whether that's court-made orders or by consent, if you figure it out, or a binding financial agreement. And, binding financial agreements have their own issues. But the most secure way is to get those consent orders through the courts. Otherwise, the divorce and the property are two completely separate things under our system.
Interesting. I'm sorry, you have a question.
Yes. We haven't touched a topic of coercive control. That is other side of divorce, which
Yes,
is
so it's an excellent question that our audience members asking about coercive control and pointing out that it's another side of divorce. We're not just talking about situations where there may be domestic violence
correct,
involved.
because domestic violence involves sometimes when there is a domestic violence involved with coercive control, the situation of divorce is not a matter of divorce anymore. It's beyond.
Yeah. Our audience member made the point where there's coercive control involved. It's a much harder process. So can you talk to us a little bit about that, Kate? If someone feels that they're under coercive control, they're perhaps not being physically assaulted, but maybe they are, but there's a whole other layer to it. How do you handle that when a client comes to you?
Yes, we handle that with many cases, and it's true. It's really difficult to manage, and I did allude to it with my answer earlier. When you've got coercive control, everything is hard. Everything is hard. Where the school uniforms are is hard, or where the finances are is hard. Coercive control goes hand in hand with not making financial disclosure or lots of threats and those sorts of things. So from a legal point of view, how we handle it is we try to really manage communication, and, we might put in place something like the Our Family Wizard app, which, some of you may have heard of, but it's like an app where all communication between the parties goes through that app, and it's moderated, and might only be at certain times. So we really just try and pull back and put some really strong parameters, because if you don't get away, and look, this has been my personal experience. I'm not talking as a lawyer in this part. My personal experience having to deal with coercive control is a form of domestic violence, but having to deal with that is that you really do need to put in some strong cutoffs, and you really have to protect yourself so that you can, at the times that you need to engage, you can engage without being sent back into like a tailspin, and that sort of feeling like you're in a blender or your brain's in a blender. So from our point of view as a lawyer, we would be really trying to put those parameters in place on behalf of our clients.
So no communication between them.
No communication outside of what's required, the minimum that's required for the parties to function. And with what Karen just said, then we'd be looking at those sorts of arrangements where it's like, well, this is my family and this is what we're doing, and then what happens over here is quite separate. So really trying to kind of separate those things until that person can rebuild, and they may never be able to re-engage with that person, depending on how much damage has been done.
Yes.
Question for you, Kate. And thanks everyone for coming. It's been a brilliant discussion. Just a question in regards to marriage. So what can people, or I don't want to say women, but what can people do throughout their marriage from a legal perspective to avoid some of the pitfalls, whether it be entities that assets are owned within, and being a director of trustee? What are some of the pitfalls that people can avoid during marriages to avoid being at a disadvantage should the divorce.
So I'll just repeat the question because we're recording this for our podcast and I might quite pick up Elizabeth. What are some of the excellent question was to Kate, what are some of the things people can do during the marriage to protect some of their assets and have more clarity on financial aspects of the marriage, company formations of that nature? Maybe you have some ideas on that too.
Look, I think at any point during a relationship, marriage or otherwise, you can enter into a binding financial agreement. Think depending on the type of level of assets that we're talking about, it might be, significant inheritances, or it could be, hey, I want to do this and I really want this to be mine. But the ability to have those conversations and say that that's what you want, I think is part of that relationship. So I think the biggest protective factor is being able to talk about money with your partner. And then, there's certainly things you can put in place from either interfamily loans or binding financial agreements over, and that can be an ongoing thing. Trusts are, problematic without going into all of that. But the family court, if you're going to go down that track, it can, pierce the veil. It can see through all of those things. So from my point of view and, our law firm, we use a lot of forensics. So we will, if we're working for someone and we think someone's been hiding stuff, we'll go to that. So, and trust won't necessarily help you. So I know people kind of talk a lot about wanting to set up trusts and then that won't be able to be gotten and all those sorts of things. That's not necessarily the case. And that's, there's obviously a lot of even more complex structures that you can put in place. But, like pretty much if we can find it, we will include it from our point of view. But I think, if everybody's being honest, then there's no problem with saying, hey, I'm about to inherit this. I really don't want this to go to you, especially if it's a blended family. I think that's a really legitimate conversation to have. Can we write this up? And I think if you hit a snag at that point, I think you do have a problem that you have a bigger problem down the track. So I hope that answers that question. But do you have something to add, Louise?
Yes, definitely. You don't sign things you don't understand. So, in a lot of conversations that I have, the wife doesn't really want to understand the loan, or I'm explaining for them, they're glossing it over. Obviously, a lot of contract, a lot of technicalities, there's legal terms you need to understand, or even buying a property, right? The number of pages that come with a property contract can be quite scary. So, get the right team, the people around you, but definitely don't sign something you don't agree to or you're not sure what is it about. Because you could be signing as a guarantor for a loan, even you don't know what that paper document is. So there are a lot of things you can do to protect yourself. Definitely, get legal advice when you need to, but, really understand what you're in for. And you'd be surprised. Even check your credit report. If something appears there and I don't think I applied for this loan or I didn't do anything, these are just things that you can help yourself check your balances. Has anything disappeared from the accounts lately? So again, back to just understanding money and what you're in for, especially legally. Because you sign yourself as a guarantor means that, even though the other party can't pay the loan, you're in for the loan 100%. The bank doesn't care that you applied for the loan together, but if the other person defaults, it's your problem to pay the loan. So these are things that, people just need to be aware of. Yeah.
And maybe I'll just put it out there is, from my point of view, is communication. Usually the problems start out really small, but if you are able to start with those small conversations to start with about money and being open when you go into it very early on in the relationship and you're able to talk about it, then I think, so long as you have that ongoing relationship where you can talk about things, then things start to be resolved. But the more that's left unsaid, the greater the issue at the end.
Well, you answered my question and great question, by the way. Is that you spoke about, our marriages not being disposable, pre-marriage counselling, and now you've just talked about, talking about it early. Are there kind of questions or things that you can talk about even before you kind of get into a serious relationship, just to start that, like, so that you're kind of almost having those conversations?
So the question to Karen is, are there conversations you can have even before you get in a basic relationship, even before it's at the marriage stage? What are some basic questions?
Oh, there are so many that I
Interview question. Checklist.
there can be a checklist, but the first thing and foremost is, what are your values? Where does the baseline start? So are you on the same track? It can be simple things as, I've seen so many couples, some want kids, some don't, but they haven't had that discussion before they even went into a relationship. I remember, and I hope these people don't see this video, but
Don't give names.
no. But I remember, a couple coming from different parts of towns, and at the wedding, the preacher said, or the priest said to the husband, "You've done very well," and to the wife, they said, "Good luck." and you should have heard the gasp in the wedding, at the church, and it was like, okay. So I think values. Where do you see your life going together? Where do you see yourselves living? What are the values for having kids? Where do you see them? Do you see them in public school? Do you see them in private school? I can't tell you the number of times I've had couples in my office telling me, "I want private school. I want public. There's nothing wrong. I want to save them money to go traveling." Where else can I go? There are so many questions, but I think it's the most fundamental questions to say, what are your values? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts for the future? Where do you see us going? Where do you see us in 5 years' time? Where do you see us in 10 years' time? Where do you want to live for retirement? So people see that it is for the long term. I see a lot of young people coming into the office going, uh-oh, we just feel pregnant. So we're going to have a kid. But then the relationship doesn't last. And then, they go off and then have multiple relationships. And then there are kids at the center of it. And unless there is somebody with stability and family stability, where it is extended family, and to have these conversations, and for young adults to have these conversations with their families. Mistakes happen. But how do we move through that? And that is the discussion that we need to have with our kids and for ourselves as well. Answer your question.
Cool. Do we have any other questions for our panel? We've got them here for another 15 minutes, 20 minutes. They'll probably stay all night.
Jack says 5 minutes.
Jack says 5. Anything at all. It can be anything simple, practical. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for everyone's sharing. It's really insightful. My question is about in terms of the whole kind of ecosystem people are navigating the separation, the divorce. What do you think is most in need support that's lacking in the system?
So the question is, what's the most needed support for people navigating separation or divorce? What's lacking? What's not out there? Okay, we might start.
I guess a lot.
I think I wouldn't have said that there's a lot of support lacking. I think it's probably that people, when you're going through something like that,
the first thing you want to do is kind of protect yourself. So you tend to retreat. And also something that we haven't covered, but I think is really worth noting, is that often your friendship group will change. And I think that's something that's not talked about really. And so that's really difficult because, if your friendship group changes, part of your identity changes. So that, which is so much broader than just, I'm getting divorced, which obviously has its own issues. But I think finding those people that are going to be the people that are going to be your friends through it. And look, I put my hand, I've gone through this. And I'd have to say there were people that I thought were my friends and they weren't. And so finding the people that are your friends and really sort of utilizing them as your support network. And that doesn't mean every time you see them going, oh my God, this divorce and this is what's happening and he won't drop off the kids and I haven't got any school uniforms. It's not that. Like, don't wear them out with that stuff, but actually utilize them. Like it might be, hey, I need someone to just sit with me and help me go through these numbers and I get my head spins every time I try. That sort of thing, find those people that are really going to sort of navigate that through you. And it might be that you're going to be that for someone else as well. I know I've done it for a few people, not as a legal sort of thing, but just as a friend. And so I think understanding that that's something that comes with divorce and separation, and that just finding those few close friends that you can still have fun with, that you can trust, and that can sort of support you on a practical level. I think that makes a big difference.
Thank you. Yes.
So one question, actually for three of you, is for someone who has seen a lot of divorces and the marriage didn't work out. What are the one lesson that you would, if you able to go back in time, what are the one lesson that you would tell 20 younger, or the one lesson they can teach your children?
So the question to our panel as experts who've seen a lot of divorces and separations is, what's the one lesson they would take from that?
Yeah.
You have to whittle it down to one.
Whittle it down to
one thing.
One thing I would say to younger self.
What would you say to you? What would they say to their younger self? What could they say to their younger self?
The one thing that I say a lot of is in marriages, everybody takes on a role. But I think one of the things for women women and men, but mainly I find it with women, take on and know your financial literacy. Because I've seen, unfortunately, many women not know their finances and then be left. And good friends have done that. I've seen them flounder. So change your mindset and have a broad understanding of all the roles that we play in life.
Thank you.
For me, if I could go back and tell myself what at that point, it would be that life will go on and there is so many more amazing things to come, and that's not the end of it. So I think that is what I would tell myself.
I was going to talk about financial literacy since Karen had talked about it. But I think being aligned, who you're actually getting into a relationship with, I think that is so important. Because if one person has a certain lifestyle and the other person lives simply, and one person loves spending, things are not going to work out. One day something's going to break in a relationship. So really find someone with the same values. And, and I think that finance conversation needs to happen earlier. Like if you want to do a prenup, but you're not willing to do that financial bit, then it doesn't work, right? So for anyone, 20 years younger, before getting a relationship, definitely work out your values of what's my writing this. Yeah.
I think we're out of time. So thank you very much to our panel for sharing all their experience. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before you leave, I have a quick but important note. What we've discussed in this podcast is general information only. It's not legal advice, and it's not a substitute for getting advice tailored to your specific situation. The law, and family law and employment law particularly, are highly fact-specific. Small details can make a big difference. So if something we talked about resonates with you, we encourage you to get proper advice before taking any action. Nothing in this podcast creates a lawyer-client relationship, but we're always happy to point you in the right direction. If there is something you'd like us to discuss, please reach out and let us know, and I hope you tune in next time.